Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of HOI4 TNO Order. In the update of Toolbox theory for the new order, two extremist leaders for England, Sterling and Chesterton, were given 100-day focus trees. And if you know me, you know I love myself a little bit of funny in the new order. So today we will be trying out as one of those leaders, David Sterling. One of the leading members of Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance, Sterling is the most famous in the new order for formerly having this as his unification super event. For obvious reasons, they have removed that in the latest update, but it will still be interesting to see where he leads England in the 100 days of content he gets. So, without further ado, let's get started in the playthrough, shall we? Timothy O'Flaherty considered himself about as normal as one could be under the circumstances. The police hadn't changed so much since the Germans invaded. In his eyes, it was what has come after that had been worse. The London Uprising, not to mention the constant terrorism not by Fenians but by Englishmen themselves. The rebels winning might well end in the Germans coming back, and for his wife and daughter's sake, he'd do anything to prevent that. Passing Inspector O'Flaherty was Griselda Robbins. Griselda had grown up under the bull. She watched the Germans kill her friends in the London Uprising and watched her brother break on the streets because he couldn't earn a living with his leg blown off, which is why she joined Himmler. London might be the home for the traitors after all, but they were an arrogant bunch who couldn't even notice those moving beneath their feet. Now we are presented with two choices in our focus trees, either to go with the government or to go with the rebels, and of course we are going to stick with Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance. If she were to be honest with herself, Griselda wasn't that fussed on the return of the Queen or whatever the official line was. Griselda wanted revenge against those who had betrayed England, and if HMMLR were the ones offering, who was she to turn them down? Right, and now after completing that focus, we have unlocked some decisions. Firstly, here we have the State of the Nation, where we can attempt to flip different states to our cause. We have Himmler-OFN relations, which will provide us with guns for later operations. And finally, we have the King's speech, and we need to lower the safety of the speech to make sure HMMLR can carry out an assassination attempt on the King later down the line. Griselda had memorized every guard rotation. She was ready, and Griselda dearly hoped that would be enough. And with that, no more preparations, Edward goes live. Let's see how Himmler's assassination attempt on the King goes. The grenade toss had almost been perfect, landing amongst the people behind the King rather than the traitor's feet, but the result had been impressive nevertheless. The King had been hustled off unharmed, but his cronies hadn't been so lucky. Assassination attempt on Edward VIII. Apparently God was fond of the King this day. Alright, and after the assassination attempt on the King, we have arrived to the second stage of our focus tree, where we get introduced to the three main leading figures of Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance. First, we have here Bill Alexander, leader of the Left Resistance, and he represents sort of the communist or labor wing of Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance. Next, we have here Cloud Auchinleck. Known to most simply as the Boss, almost nobody outside Himmler's upper ranks is aware the former general turned MP leads the greatest rebel group in the Isles. And finally, we have here David Sterling, who is this kinda hardcore, no-nonsense, effective radical who is not afraid to use all kinds of methods to ensure Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance final victory. And subsequently, this is the guy we're trying to get into power. Anyway, now that we have completed the focuses regarding the three leading figures of HMMLR, God, it's much easier to say Himmler, isn't it? We can now begin the focus, Operation Bad Morning, which unlocks a set of 6 operations that we can complete in our decisions. And first, we will attempt to initiate Operation Bad Morning, and we shall attempt to assassinate the traitor Gerald Templar using a car bomb. And there we go, Operation Bad Morning, success. The result was spectacular. The Northern General, while unfortunately not killed in the explosion, was severely injured and would have almost certainly died had there not been an ambulance called by his neighbors. We won't be seeing him again. Alright, next up, Operation Stock. We will capture equipment and armored vehicles from government depots. The results could not have been better. Our forces were able to successfully neutralize field guards at our station. Trucks, armored cars, and even tanks are now in our hands, and the balance of power has decidedly shifted in our direction as a result. And now it's time for Operation Broken Telephone, this time aiming for the bombing of General Barker and Baker. The operation was a complete success. Both men were completely unprepared for the attack. With the deaths of both generals and the successful raid, the cracks are beginning to show in the collaborator regime. Then finally we have Operation Inspection, this time aiming for the assassination of General Chassos, which unfortunately ends in failure, as our soldiers miscalculated and it appears that Chassos changed his security protocols. That's a shame, but now we can also do Operation Lookup, where we will attempt to kill General Carver. That ends in partial success. He had been shot in the heart with a serious injury, but not a permanent one. And finally, we have our last operation, Operation Loud and Clear, which aims at the assassination of General Bernard Montgomery. And unfortunately, I don't think this was possible to start with. I think Montgomery is just too important to the story, and they just can't kill him off right here. Montgomery was evacuated and reinforcements soon arrived, forcing our operatives into retreat. Alright, and now with the 6 operations done and completed, it's time for us to prepare for what is ahead, the English Civil War. Let's begin our truly last operation, Operation France. We're ready. You were to have everything done and dusted in 2 hours or you back out. I won't need 2 hours, just give me 15 minutes. For a few glorious seconds, the night outside the Plymouth countryside was lit up by tremendous firebolts traversing 100 meters into the sky. Underfield Fibber Alois Gensch could only stare in horror at something he dearly hoped would stay east of the garrison's border. Not a minute later, the SAS commando stalked over the cooling corpses of Gensch squad and signaled to the communists all clear. The looting of the Cornwall's garrison's explosive depot could begin. The world was all aflame as bullets impacted stonework and wood, while shells blazed trails of light through the night skies. The Germans were fighting as well as could be expected, but it was not enough. That after all been trained on fighting as English rebel organizations operating under no, not together and in concert. Copying the horrified remnants of the camp's guard ran away. The fighting in that section of the town ended quickly after that. In the second part of Cloud's camp, it began as prisoners took their chance for freedom and began piling into vehicles to go they knew not where, save that it would be somewhere free. Cloud Auchinleck sat in the bunker. The transcript in front of him was a joint report from Sterling Alexander. As the test run for a liberation plan, everything in Plymouth had gone near perfectly. The traitors hadn't even been able to mobilize troops in time to intercept his men. There needed to be something going to distract the Reich, of course, but Cloud Auchinleck, for once in his life, could look to the future with some hope. And it seems like that necessary trigger point has happened, or the English Civil War has begun. The German Civil War has presented us with a golden opportunity for freeing England from its collaborationist oppressor. After a brief radio message with a monarch's voice, the first uprisings began. One day we will again hold Parliament in Westminster and serve the people of England as we bring our country back from the fascist abyss. And never again will our flags be lowered and our country divided, for Britons shall never be slaves. For Queen and country. So basically our tactic in the English Civil War in order to get David Stirling into power is to fight for every single inch of English soil so that our war devastation and radicalization in all English states can be as high as possible. So immediately let's retreat our divisions to the north and start working our way down there.
Up to mighty London came an Irish lad one day. All the streets were paved with gold, so everyone was gay, singing songs of Piccadilly, Strand and Leicester Square, till Paddy got excited and he shouted to them there. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. It's a
Alright, and after almost 4 months of holding out in these 5 provinces, Our war devastation in a lot of regions has reached extremely high levels, and we can also start doing some questionable things to win the war. Anyhow, with the collaborationist lines now severely depleted, I think we can start attacking them. Let's begin our counteroffensive.
It's the pen that's bad, don't lay the blame on me. It's a long way to Tipperary. It's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly. Farewell, Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. Molly wrote a neat reply to Irish Paddy O, saying Mike Maloney wants to marry me, and so leave the Strand and Piccadilly, or you'll be to blame.
And after 6 months of the war, we have finally reached London, and our war devastation has almost reached 100% in every state of the country.
It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly. Farewell, Leicester Square.
And there we have it. After a bloody civil war claiming the lives of up to 500,000 Englishmen, Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance is victorious. Hundreds of thousands of English soldiers and civilians are dead, and the former workshop of the world has been reduced to rubble. Alright, so now with the end of the English Civil War, we have unlocked a new focus tree, and we can begin with a forgotten word: England. The first reaction was one of shock. Was this really it? Did that announcement really happen? Then came groups marching under white flags, then become a flood as the entire army disarmed and marched over to give up. Far beyond the front lines in Himmler territory, the mood was a lot less subdued. Massive celebrations broke out all over free England, and who could blame them? The suffering and bloodshed was over. Families would not be bombed out. No longer would England be asked to bear the terrible sacrifices it had endured. And England would know freedom. Upon our victory in the English Civil War, we have two immediate things that we need to do before we move towards the reconstruction of our nation. The first of which is, of course, our demobilization, and the second of which is considering our democracy, more specifically the Young Democracy Law. So the problem is that oftentimes revolutions are not successful. So we're proposing some sort of legal mechanism to stop this. Precisely, something that could cut around any political instability and fix any problems with England before they cripple the nation. A legalized potential coup. David, I know you're upset, but the Young Democratic League is necessary to ensure the security of the government by giving a legal backslide into authoritarianism. If we don't, what happens if things go wrong? Don't make them go wrong, or stop trying to make an extreme solution to a theoretical problem. I have a feeling this will be relevant somewhere down the line. Anyhow, with the immediate issues we have faced after a civil war dealt with, now our efforts must turn to recovery. A reconstruction that will need all of England to come together to succeed. As part of our reconstruction, the newly established government of England will hold a series of trials called the Oxford Trials against important figures that once worked for the collaborator regime. And it is this trial combined with the absolute state of our war devastation that will eventually drive our nation towards the MSA and David Stirling. So, let's get started. The head of the snake, Home was not faced as they sentenced him to death, and did not struggle as he was pulled back to the cell to await his fate. The execution of Alec Douglas Home, the head of the snake, has been cut. The bootlicker. The prosecution accused Chesterton of being a proud self-proclaimed English fascist and a former confidant of Oswald Mosley. Sent him to the gallows. The trial of the field marshal. Death is the only choice for traitors. God save the Queen. Sound of gunshots answered him, and he fell. The trial of the generals. Send them before a firing line. One by one, the generals were brought before the firing squad. Some referenced God, others referenced the Queen, a couple referenced the King, one begged for forgiveness. All fell before the bullets. the trial of Harold Macmillan. Macmillan was always going to be a controversial case. For many years he headed up the reformist faction of the Royal Party and at least somewhat pushed for partial reform. One bullet back of the head. Clap clap. Surely there was some mistake. Surely Stirling's influence was not that great, and surely the government not so dictatorial and unflinching that they would hang a decent man. Do you have any last words? He only had one vicious word to say before the lever was pulled. Why? And finally, we have the trial of Reginald modeling forcible and permanent location to an area we can think of. As the lights of his country disappeared over the horizon, he felt sadness for the loss of his homeland, for all his friends he was leaving behind, and the fate of those who would inevitably suffer a harsh and unforgiving group as the Stirlingites. A portent of things to come. And as you can see, executing all those people sure did wonders for the MSA's popularity. Oh, what time is it? Of course, it's time for the English election. The time has come. The candidates have been chosen for every party and every seat around the country. It's time for the elections. Defend Britain, vote for the MSA. Yeah, this is a little bit overkill if you ask me. Is it me or does it look like the MSA is going to win, guys? Well, I still need to campaign for them, I guess. But yeah, I feel like the election results are going to be a little bit one-sided. And meanwhile, after we have finished our focus tree here, the election results are out. And the movement in support of the army wins the elections. People across England celebrated even if their own party did not win, as it signaled the restoration of democracy which had been denied for years under the collaborator state. The choice to elect the MSA signaled the will of the others who rejected the politics of the old and embraced the promises of the MSA to prioritize the protection of English people and to restore England to our place on the world stage. A new English era. Let's begin David Stirling's 100 Day of Content. At long last victory is ours. The MSA has won the first free elections held since the Second World War. To honor the dead, to preserve the living, the MSA will defend Britain, whatever the cost may be. My fellow Britons, I'm honored that you place your trust in me to secure the future of this country, and secure this movement shall. People of Britain, this movement promises you safety, freedom, and justice against those who wronged you. Thank you, and have a good day. Alright, and now that we have done our first focus, hooray for the MSNA, we can move on to Lion's Righteous Grip, where we get introduced to 4 of our head government and ministers. First we have Gower Pauline, one of the leading figures in the bloc in Parliament. Then we have Arthur Harris, and the man knew what had to be done in order to protect the nation from Germany. We've got Richard Hull, which is concession to Cloud's lot. And finally we have John Woodhouse. Between them, Stirling was sure that Britain would prevail or the world would shake apart trying to stop them. Titans of the New Age, heroes of Britain's liberation. I have no idea why only Richard Hull has been added here, must be some kind of bug. Either way, we have now arrived to shove the gunpowder, where we get introduced to sort of the core of this 100-day focus, the abolition of the Young Democracy Law. And meanwhile here we also have the coronation of Elizabeth II. Very cool. The Young Democracy Law. The measure seems like a cruel joke, a mockery of what the men and women who had bled, suffered and died for free Britain had fought for. No matter what, this undemocratic measure would be dealt with. He would see to it. He had a solution. He would use the act as a primary mechanism, but one which would not outright destroy the law but reduce it to irrelevance. Only the British should decide the path of England. Regarding with how we deal with the passing of the act, we essentially have 2 options here. Either to trust in the people or trust in the military. But I mean, might as well go all the way. Let's trust in the military. David Stirling stood in his office in 10 Downing Street. It'd be so easy to make a few calls to secure the resignation of several MPs. He could call up some of his friends and allies from the armed forces and grant them informal positions in his cabinet. Sure, the tabloids might question the legality of the move, but they care. Strength might be the only thing to save the British people from its decaying institutions. These are extreme times. Call up the boys. A small royal slight. There are few events that will attract a larger media crowd than a photo op with Prime Minister David Stirling and the returned Queen of England, Elizabeth. They respect you. Respect may not be the right word, Your Majesty, but I appreciate the thought. I think many do. You would not have been elected by the people otherwise. The nation needs a good man to lead them. I'm glad it was you. Stirling smiled at that, quite pleased by the compliment. He checked the time and realized that his meeting was coming up. The meeting could wait. Alright, so now with these 2 focuses done, our preparations have concluded. Let the men in shadows challenge this, for a cause is just true. We answer the people, and the people alone. And yeah, because of our insane majority in the parliament, I think this bill is going to easily pass. But nevertheless, before we can actually repeal the YDL, we still have to dig up some dirt on the other founding members of Her Majesty's Most Loyal Resistance, you know, just in case. Well, Alexander was a man who had been invaluable to the resistance. It's such a shame that they were communists and trade unionists. It had probably been Alexander who pushed for a cloud to drop the Young Democracy law in the first place, as Alexander would prefer controlled democracy to fascist collaborators. Unfortunately for him, Stirling knew what he could do. A coordinated media campaign highlighting the violence of the trade unions, and the shine over another hero of England would be tarnished. A sigh escaped Stirling's lips as he reviewed the documents ready arranged before him. Cloud Auchinleck was a hero to so many in the country. Stirling didn't want to shame him, but he didn't need to, not directly. Rumors were powerful, and when word got out that Cloud once had dealings with many of the collaborators, well, it might make people a little more hesitant to listen to what he had to say. Alright, and with all of that done and dusted, we can finally commence the repeal of the YDL. And pretty much to no one's surprise, it is the will of the chamber that has passed. The Young Democracy law was dead, and they could not ever act against the will of the British people. Stirling smiled. His first battle had been won. The challenges Britain faced today are enormous. We must restore our empire and do all we can do to secure Britain that is strong and free, a beacon in a world overrun by darkness. There is much work to be done. I hope you will join me in a toast to our success. For Britain. David Stirling sat in the park and he listened to the children running by. He'd done the thing he'd set out to do all those years ago. Britain wasn't shackled by the barbarism of fascism or the small-minded pretty fuckery of the traitor government. She was free, and so too were her people, free to forge a path for Britain, where the future would be bright. Even if David Stirling didn't quite know how it would come about, Britain would see her son rise once more, rule Britannia. And that is where our playthrough ends. You know, all things considered, compared to the other 100-day focuses I've played, David Stirling really isn't that bad. Sure, you have to execute a lot of people and also mess the country up in order to get him in power, but you know, he's alright. At least better than the guns blazing, massacring crowd image that he was given according to the old super event. Yeah, definitely interesting to see what his full content would be. But anyways, that's the video. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't yet, leave a comment on what I should play next, and I'll see you all hopefully soon. Goodbye.